Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. Comes to us from Maryland. His name is Chris Pabst, Pabst. If you're watching this on my YouTube channels, X, Rumble, Rockfin, you'll see the cover of his new book. The full title of his new book is Failure Factory: How Baltimore City Public Schools Deprive Taxpayers and Students of a Future. And it's available now. It was published late last year. It's on Amazon. I'm sure you can find it on other places. I read through it today. There's a Kindle version, audiobook version, hardcover, paperback, so you can get it in whatever format you like. It also has excellent reviews. It has a 4.9, deserved reviews, 4.9, like 68, 4.9s, which is very unusual. Like, I look at books all the time, so I know that they usually kind of median out at around, I mean, a good book at 4.5 or something like that. So he is the lead investigative reporter for Project Baltimore, Fox 45 News' ongoing investigation into Maryland's public education system. He's also a national award-winning reporter and a best-selling author. His work has led to the passing of state laws, criminal convictions, and court rulings that have set legal precedent throughout Maryland. His book, Capital Murder, hit #1 on Amazon in 3 categories. His second book, Devolution, a novel, was released in the summer of 2016. He's received many awards, such as from the Maryland General Assembly, Maryland Office of the Comptroller, and the Maryland Office of the Inspector General for Education. He also received in 2023 the Vanguard Award in the Maryland State Conference NAACP. He also received the Excellence in Education Advocacy Award from the Randallstown chapter of the NAACP. And his reports have been recognized by some of this journalism that he's done, including an Emmy Award for investigative reporting from the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. But again, we're going to talk about this book. It's a really interesting book. He's on site. He's there in Baltimore, so he had a first-person account of this and experience. I kind of called him kind of like a central hub. A lot of people sent him emails and information too once he did his reporting, but he can talk more about that. So Chris Pabst, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
For people who haven't heard your name before, maybe some of the audience aren't familiar with your work, you can talk about your background, your earlier books, and then what led up to the research and then the writing of this particular book, Failure Factory.
Sure. So I'm from southeastern Pennsylvania, little tiny town. My father was a public education school teacher for 35 years in the teachers union. My brother and I went to K through 12 public schools, and for college, I went to University of Pittsburgh, played baseball for 4 years, got my master's degree at Temple University. I started out writing for newspapers in 2002. And at that time, the internet was really picking up and people really weren't sure what was going to happen with newspapers. A lot of them were going out of business. So I figured that broadcasting might be a more stable future, because I knew I wanted to do investigative journalism. That's really what my passion was back then, that and baseball. And so I got my first broadcasting job after I got my master's degree in Casper, Wyoming. And this is just what you do in television news. You start in little tiny markets. You travel all around, you make your mistakes, and by the time you get to a big market, hopefully you're polished and ready to go. So for me, that started in Casper, Wyoming. I then went to Madison, Wisconsin. I then went to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where I really started doing my investigative reporting, after I figured out my delivery and my writing and all this other stuff. From the day-to-day general assignment reporting, I started doing investigative reporting. And I covered the bankruptcy of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for 4 years. And Harrisburg, Pennsylvania is interesting because it's the only capital city in American history to file for bankruptcy. And I was in the room when city council filed for bankruptcy. And then I ended up covering it for 4 years. And I wrote my first book that you mentioned, Capital Murder, on what Harrisburg did wrong. And my intent there was just to show other cities and other governments how not to operate. And then in 2014, I got a job in Washington, D.C., working as an investigative reporter for the ABC News affiliate. And then in 2017, this opportunity of Project Baltimore came up. And Project Baltimore and Fox 45 News are owned by a company called Sinclair Broadcast Group. And they came up with this idea of having a 5-person team 2 photographer editors, 2 producers, and myself as the reporter, and we would focus on one topic. And in 2017, in January of 2017, when this book begins, our topic that we chose was public education, specifically in Baltimore City, but over the last 9 years has branched out into the suburbs and largely all of Maryland now. And the reason that we chose public education as our first topic was because we could see with federal data that Baltimore City was one of the most funded large school systems in America. And we could see that through the census. And at the time, Baltimore, I think, was the third most funded school system in America. And today, it still is. But we could also see in federal data that Baltimore City was one of the lowest performing large school systems in America. And that's from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, known as NAEP. So we started in January of 2017 simply asking a question that any good journalist would ask, which is, why? And how can this happen? And why is it being allowed to happen? How can you have one of the most funded, most expensive large school systems in America that year after year after year is also one of the lowest performing? And that was the question that really launched this entire concept of Project Baltimore. And 8 years later, at the end of 2025, I released Failure Factory, because after doing this every single day of my professional life in Baltimore City for the past 8 years, now 9 years, I think that we have now answered the question, why is this happening and why is this being allowed to happen? So that's why I wrote Failure Factory, because what's happening in Baltimore City is by no means limited to Baltimore City. What we're seeing in public education is that throughout the entire country, and it's really a culture that has been developed within public education. And I wrote the book to educate people about what's really happening, where your money is really going, how the data is being manipulated, what you can and what you can't trust when it comes to public education. Because I feel like people need to know, because we cannot allow our public schools to continue to get so much more expensive while not producing a better outcome for students.
Right. And the numbers are enormous. I think you mentioned Baltimore alone. The budget is over $1 billion. Is that right?
Way over $1 billion. It's now approaching $2 billion. So the budget this year is about $1.8 billion for around 75,000 kids. Now, to put that into perspective, in 2017, when this book starts, the budget for Baltimore City schools was $1.3 billion for 82,000 kids. So the budget has gone up about 30%, while the enrollment has gone down about 8%. And that's what we're seeing throughout the entire country. And when you see stuff like that, you really have to start asking yourself, okay, what return on investment are taxpayers getting for that money? If we're giving you a lot more money to educate fewer students, you would think that the outcomes would get better. But the reason I wrote this book is because they're not getting better. And that's the problem.
It's incredible. So that means that some of these kids, if you break it down, if you divide 2 billion by 75,000 students, these kids are the money that the state's paying to educate these kids are on par with like a college education. Isn't that right? Like a state college education? How much do you know? Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, go with your question.
Well, I was just going to say, do you know what the per student payments per year is right now in 2025?
Yeah, it's about $23,000, between $23,000 and $24,000 a student. So in Baltimore City, let's just go over some of these numbers. And I think that once we go over some of these numbers, everything will start becoming very, very clear. Because when people read the book, what I as a journalist, what I'm doing is I'm not telling you, I'm showing you. I'm going to say, this is the data from the Maryland State Department of Education. This is the data from Baltimore City Public Schools. And I'm just going to put it all right there and make it very easy and put it all in one place with context so you can really see it. Because a lot of what public schools do is the data's out there, but it's not organized. And people don't have time. Like, someone who's a carpenter or a plumber, or, an accountant, they don't have time to be me and to sit there for 40 hours a week and page through numbers of public school systems to see if you can try to make any of this make sense. So that's what I did. And I put all this data together and you can look at it. And I'll just give you some numbers. So in 2017, when Failure Factory begins. Baltimore City Schools, as we mentioned, had a $1.3 billion budget and had about 83,000 students. Fast forward 8 school years. That gets you to 2024. That's 8 school years, which is the most recent year for which we have data because educational data lags about a year, maybe a little bit more than a year. And Baltimore City Schools in 2024 had a $1.7 billion budget. So they got a 30% pay increase. Now, the graduation rate in 2017 was 70%. The graduation rate in 2024 was 70%. It didn't change. Taxpayers gave the school system $400 million additional dollars a year, and the graduation rate didn't change. How about math proficiencies? Most people would say math proficiencies in today's world is probably the most important thing out there. 11% of students in Baltimore City were proficient in math in 2017. In 2024, after $400 million additional dollars were put into the school system every year, 10% of the kids were proficient in math. So 90% of the students in Baltimore City in 2024 were not proficient in math, with $1.7 billion getting put into that school system. So you might be listening to the numbers that we're talking about right now. And kind of like what we did at Project Baltimore is we said, well, hold on a second. How can you be graduating 70% of your kids, but yet 10% of your kids are proficient in math? That doesn't make any sense. Unless you look at education through the lens that this book will provide you. And what that is that the data will show that public schools are no longer prioritizing education. They're prioritizing the acquisition of funding and then the usage of that funding to hire adults, which grows the political influence and the power of the public education system. If you want to see how an organization is, what it's focusing on, where it's putting its energy, you have to look at where it's improving. And where Baltimore City Public Schools and where many public schools are improving is with the amount of money, the amount of funds, the amount of taxpayer dollars that they're getting. Baltimore City Schools increased 30% in funding over 8 years. Where they're not improving are the academic outcomes for students.
Right. And then they have the amount of salaries are really nice. Like they're good salaries. If you're an administrator, I think you had this one woman, Santa Lisa's, you mentioned her, like she's making $500,000 with perks and stuff like that per year. With these kind of shady outcomes, with a lot of corruption in the application of information data and things like that. Can you expand on that?
Oh, absolutely. So you look at Sonia Santelises is the CEO of Baltimore City Public Schools. She got there on July 1st of 2016. So she got there roughly 6 or 7 months before Project Baltimore began, when Failure Factory, when the book starts. And what's interesting about that is that she has been there the entire time that this book was written, the whole 8 school years that this book covers. So there's been stability. There's been stability in the school system because she has been there. But think about the numbers that we just mentioned. She was able to get 30% additional funding a year for her school system, but she was not able to increase the graduation rate. She was not able to increase math proficiencies. Now, ELA, English Language Arts proficiencies, are a little bit higher over the 8 years, but that is the only metric that is improved. Attendance is worse, chronic absenteeism is worse, the mean SAT score, the average SAT score is worse. And this is a person making $500,000 in total compensation for those types of outcomes. And it leads back to the original point that we're trying to make with Failure Factory, is that you can't look at public education through the means of focusing on the education part. Because how else would you explain that somebody with a track record like that keeps their job for now 9 years going on 10, when there hasn't been significant improvement or really any improvement in academic outcomes for students? And it lends itself, when you look at the numbers, how they're laid out, that the school systems are not prioritizing the kids. They're prioritizing the adults.
Right. And you're actively involved on the street, going to the schools, trying to talk to the teachers. You were involved in some civil litigation with them about some of the
Yep.
data. Can you kind of go into your boots on the ground kind of investigation?
Well, I think that's what makes local journalism so important. And whenever I talk to people about the media, about journalism, about reporters, I do always stress that there is a difference between the national media and local media. Now, I never worked in national media, so I can't really talk to national media. But what I can say is very different about local media is that we local journalists live in this community. I pay my taxes here. I send my kids to school here. I go grocery shopping here. I go out to bars and restaurants here. This is where I live. In national journalism, something will happen and somebody will go 2,000 miles away from their house. They'll report on it for a couple days and then fly home. Okay, well, I'm not flying home. Like, this is where I live. This is home. And when you're a local journalist, that is always in the back of your mind, because what we're trying to do, and what journalism is rooted upon, is giving people the information that they need to be good citizens, and the information they need to vote the way that they want to vote, and to have the government that they want. But in order to do that, they have to be educated on what's happening in their communities, and people are very busy. And we understand that. And that's where the local journalist comes in, to give the information that you need to decide where you want to live, where you want to send your kids to school. So in early 2017, when Project Baltimore began, I got to Baltimore, and I didn't know anybody. And this was a new town for me, never really had been here. And I did what investigative journalists do, which is you pull data. And so what I did was I started looking at a bunch of state testing, and I pulled together all the state test scores for every school in Baltimore City. And it's about 160, 165 of them. And once I was able to analyze all the data, I could see that there were 6 schools in Baltimore City that did not have a single student test proficient in any subject. Hundreds of kids, 6 entire schools that could not produce one student that was proficient in math or English. Absolutely a stunning finding. We do the story blows up, it goes viral, as it should, because that is outrageous. And after it really blew up, people started contacting me, and they were saying, you realize what you're saying is true, but these kids are also graduating. And I would ask them, and there were teachers that would reach out to me, and I say, well, how are these kids graduating? And they would tell me, because their grades are being changed. Somebody is going into the teacher's grade book, changing a failing to a passing. A 60 is a minimum passing grade, a D minus, and they're pushing the kids along, because the focus of the school system is not educating, it's passing. Get the kid to the next grade so they stay enrolled, because schools are funded based on enrollment, and eventually get that child to a diploma. So it was really hard to believe in 2017, when we started reporting on this, that was happening. But more and more teachers started to come to us, and we started doing more and more stories on it. And in December of 2017, actually, it's a little bit before, it was November of 2017, I filed a public records request with Baltimore City Public Schools, and I asked for emails and documents, internal investigations related to grade changing. Well, the school system wrote me back and said, nope, we're not going to give you anything, go away. And yeah, that's just not the right answer. So we sued them. And in December of 2017, Project Baltimore and Fox 45 sued Baltimore City Public Schools. And in February of 2019, it went to court, and I testified for a couple hours in court. That's actually where the book begins. As you were reading it, that's where the book begins, me testifying in court. And the judge in March of 2019 ruled that Baltimore City Schools willfully and knowingly violated the law. What a Baltimore City Circuit Court judge said was that Baltimore City knew it was breaking the law, but did it anyway. And it was, according to the judge, to, quote, hide possible wrongdoing. That is the government that I was dealing with. So the judge really laid the smackdown on Baltimore City schools, and she forced the school system to pay 45's legal fees of nearly $200,000. So because of Baltimore City's willingness to hide data, the judge is like, you got to pay Fox 45, which means taxpayers, because the school system did this, had to pay us. But then the judge also said, you have to give Fox 45 everything it wanted and more. So what this really was a 5-year investigation, and the entire 5 years is documented pretty heavily in the book. And what ended up happening was, and I'll just make this shorter, but all the details are in the book, is that we got a bunch of internal investigations. We got a bunch of emails, 8,000 emails we got, and we read them all. Many of them are teachers that were writing their principals saying, please stop changing my grades. Don't go into my grade book. How did this student graduate? I failed him in Spanish. Spanish is a required course to graduate in the state of Maryland. How did this student walk across the stage and never even came to my class? Like, these are the things that are happening in Baltimore City public schools that we lay out and we follow very closely, and we show all the data. And after we won in court and we started getting the information, the Maryland Inspector General for Education launched an investigation into improper grade changing. Now, he has something that I don't have in the media. He has subpoena power. So when his report came out, and this was in 2022, so this was 5 years after we first sued Baltimore City Schools. That's how long this took. And he found that there were 12,542 improper grade changes over a 4-year period in city schools. Now, these are failing grades changed to passing with the intent to promote or matriculate that student to the next grade. And he found that upwards of 10% of kids at some schools were graduating who should not have. They did not deserve it. Now, what were we talking about a few minutes ago? A 30% increase in funding. A school CEO making nearly $500,000 in total compensation who's still there. Kids graduating who should not have. Does that sound like fraud? Someone going into a grade book of a teacher and changing failing grades to passing, giving kids a state document, a diploma is a state document that they didn't earn. Does that sound like fraud? And what you have is a CEO who's still there. And it really just goes back to what we've been talking about. Public education does not really appear to be about the students. It appears to be about the adults.
Right. At least in Baltimore. I remember in your book, there's like this culture of secrecy. A lot of the stuff is fake and not disclosed. Like, you have to literally litigate for it. And they gave you like 116 pages of redacted material and stuff like that. Like, it's like the CIA or something. Like, why isn't this just put out? Like, what are you hiding? Why do you need to hide this stuff?
Well, they hide this stuff because they don't want it to come out, because they know what they're doing. The judge even said it. The judge, Jeannie Hong, circuit court judge, Baltimore City. Baltimore City, okay, this was not like red state America. This was Baltimore City saying that she believed the school system refused to hand over documents to hide possible wrongdoing. And the judge was right. The judge was right. And when you have somebody making nearly $500,000 a year, they want to keep that job. And when you have a lot of assistant superintendents, director level positions, people that are making anywhere from $200,000 to $300,000, people that are in the $150,000 to $250,000 range, they want those jobs. They want to keep those jobs. They don't want to lose them. I mean, would you? But also think about it this way. And I think that this is really the saddest part of this, is that you can keep those types of jobs making that much money when 10% of your kids are proficient in math. I mean, think if anybody listening to us right now, if you were making $250,000 a year and the expectations for your product were that low, would you want to lose that job?
So they just go along to get along, even the teachers. But it seems like even some of these teachers, they really were authentic teachers. They actually wanted to teach the kids.
No, I think the teachers are the ones that are in the classrooms with the kids. They're the ones that are on the ground. They're the ones that are dealing with the students and trying to help them and trying to do the right thing. In my experience on this, the teachers are the ones that are trying to hold the students accountable. They're the ones that are giving students the grades, whether they pass or not, the grades the child earns. The teachers are doing that. It's the administrators who want higher graduation rates because it makes the school look better and in turn makes the principal look better. Or they want a higher passing rate. They want more kids passing grades, fewer students failing grades. No, it's really, those are the people in our experience that we uncover in Failure Factory. Those are the people that are doing this because they're the ones that have the most to gain out of it. So if you're a teacher, you aren't paid based on the outcome of your students. Now, principals aren't either. Principals don't get bonuses if more kids graduate, but what they get is to keep their jobs, and they get to keep moving up the administrative ladder where they can get to a point where they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And that's the goal for many of them. But with teachers, it's different because teachers generally aren't teaching to move up the ladder of education. They teach because they love to teach, because they love the kids, because they want to help them. They want to help the child who potentially is living in poverty to pull themselves out of that predicament and to do something better. And many teachers are there for 30, 35 years. They're not looking to move up. So it doesn't benefit a teacher to change a failing grade to passing to move that child along.
Right. And so it's not just the teachers are not really part of the problem. They seem to be the ones trying to make the change. And some of them get PTSD, kind of dealing with these chaotic environments. But there's other elements of kind of deception, if not outright fraud. You wrote about this whole thing, the bridge projects where they move people over, and that's another way to keep the graduation rate the same, right? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so what we've been seeing, and again, goes back to, it's not about educating kids, it's about acquiring funding. So we go back about 20 years, and that's when you really start to see education funding just skyrocket. And when that happened, and we're just going to talk about Maryland now, but this is certainly not limited to Maryland. This is countrywide. When that happened, politicians had to go back to taxpayers and tell them, hey, this extra investment, that's the word, investment that we're putting into public schools is working. So in order to do that, what a lot of what Maryland did, again, we're going to stick to Maryland, they found ways to increase graduation rates. Now, you may think that if you want to increase graduation rates, the best way to do that is to better educate students. Well, politicians can't take that chance. So what they did in Maryland was they made it easier to graduate. And there's a bunch of different ways that they have done this. And most people would simply just call it lowering academic standards, lowering expectations of kids. And I think they're certainly right. And one of the things they did was bridge projects. So what the state of Maryland found was that back then, it's not like this anymore, and we can get to that in a second, but back then, in order to graduate from high school, this is 20 years ago, you had to do three things. You had to have 75 service hours, which are like community service hours. You had to pass 21 course credits in the main subjects, and you had to pass these state assessments in the four main subjects: math, reading, science, and social studies. Well, the state said, we don't have enough kids that can pass the assessments. In other words, we don't have enough kids that are proficient in math and reading. So they came up with this bridge concept. And what it was that they said, okay, you don't have to pass the assessment. You can do a bridge project, which essentially is a project that if the teacher approves it or somebody at the school approves it, that'll count towards passing an assessment and you can graduate. So when that passed, and I think that was 2007, you started to see every year more and more kids were using bridge projects to graduate. And by 2019, more than half of Baltimore City's graduates were graduating through the bridge projects because they didn't have the proficiencies to pass the state assessments. Now, when bridge was originally written, it wasn't written for half of your student body. It was really specifically written for students with test anxiety or disabilities, something like that. But it ended up being for all kids, and anybody could do it. And that's what we saw in Baltimore City. Well, in 2020, and this is not COVID related, Maryland passed a massive funding increase called the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, pumps billions of additional tax dollars into public education. Well, when that passed, lawmakers in Annapolis, capital of Maryland, were like, you know what? We got to make sure that we can go back to our constituents and tell them this is working. So they changed graduation requirements again in Maryland. So we mentioned there used to be 3 things that you had to pass to graduate high school in Maryland. Now there's only 2. They took away the state assessments. They took away the bridge projects altogether. Students don't have to pass it anymore. They don't have to do anything. All they have to do is do 75 service hours and 21 course credits in the main subjects. That's it. So think about that for a second. Starting in 2020, you no longer had to be proficient in math or reading to graduate high school in the state of Maryland.
It's incredible.
I mean, really think about that for a second. You don't have to be proficient in math or reading to graduate in the state of Maryland. And that was done on purpose by the legislature to increase graduation rates. Now, let's go back to what we talked about, 25 minutes ago. The graduation rate in 2017 was 70%. The graduation rate in 2024, with a 30% increase in funding, was 70%. And in the middle of that, in 2020, the state made it easier to graduate. And they still did not increase the graduation rate in Baltimore City.
It shows that more money doesn't mean better outcomes, I guess, is one of the things. Maybe outcomes for the administrators or whatever, but
well, it depends on exactly. Who are you judging here? If you're judging the students, no. If you're judging the wealth of the public education sector, yeah, more money does have a big outcome.
And they all kind of vote one way too, right? So they're all part. I mean, I think you mentioned PSASA. Like, there's definitely like teachers associations and interest groups that perpetuate their interest with the state legislature. Is that right?
Well, Maryland is a one-party state, and it's been like this for quite some time. I mean, occasionally, like we had a governor for 8 years, Larry Hogan, who left office 3 years ago. He was a 2-term governor. But he didn't really have that much power because the state legislature has super majorities for Democrats. So even if he vetoed something, it would just get overridden. Now, I do want to say that Failure Factory is by no means a political book. I don't talk about Republicans or Democrats or conservatives or liberals. I don't want that lens. I don't want people reading the book through that lens. I want people reading the book through just a fresh lens of here's data, and this is what it means, and here are the stories. Here are the parents that we interview. Here are the teachers that we interview, the administrators that we interview. Here's what's going on in Baltimore City schools. And I purposefully made it a non-political book, also because I'm a journalist, and that's not my intent. But in Maryland, the fact is that Maryland's a one-party rule state. It's all controlled by one party. Baltimore City is significantly all controlled by one party. There hasn't been a Republican mayor in Baltimore since 1960. And there has not been a city council member who's a Republican elected in Baltimore since 1930s. I mean, that's pretty crazy to think about. So this is a school system that was created by one political party. And that's a fact. There's no denying that. And I think a lot of what we see is that if you want to move up the political ladder in America, and this is Republicans and Democrats, it's generally not a good idea to criticize your own political party. Now, with the data that we just talked about, with Baltimore City being a fully one-party control city, you don't have any elected officials who are coming out demanding that the school system better educate the kids, demanding that the school system fire people and say, let's get better people in there to better educate our kids. And I think the reason that you don't see that is because the only people that could be doing that if they're elected is from one political party. And they would have to be criticizing their own political party And that just is not happening. And if you want to know why Baltimore City schools every single year is one of the most funded but lowest performing large school systems in America, it's because it's allowed to happen. Because the elected officials in Maryland and the elected officials in Baltimore City allow it to happen.
But the citizens there, I mean, who's getting taken for a ride more, the students or the parents? Because it seems like with your position in Baltimore doing this research for Project Baltimore, you're getting a lot of data, a lot of emails, and a lot of people sending you stuff directly like, hey, I'm one of those people who went through the system. I felt like I was pushed through and not educated. Like people are upset about not getting properly educated. Can you talk about that?
There's a lot of people that are upset about it, but every time there's an election, they vote for the same political party. Now, as we talked about before, like my job as a journalist is simply to give people the information so that they can be better citizens and that they can decide who they want to vote for. So I'm giving them the information. Information is right here. It's right in this book. It's Failure Factory. The information we've been reporting every single day for the past 9 years. And there have been a lot of changes. Like if you read the book, there's been a lot of positive things that have changed because of our reporting. There's been laws that have been passed. There have been policy that when we were doing the thing on grade changing, the investigation onto that, Baltimore City Schools rewrote its entire grading practices. And the grade changing can't happen the way that it was back then, or at least if it is happening, it's a lot harder to do. So they put a lot of safeguards in place to make sure that that doesn't happen, which may explain why the graduation rates haven't gone up, even though the state made it easier to graduate because the grades aren't being changed to the extent that they used to. So there are some positive things. I would argue many positive things that have come out of our reporting. But as far as who is being elected to positions, that has not changed, maybe not even a little bit. So maybe it will, maybe it won't. We're going to keep doing what we're doing, and the people can vote for whoever they want to vote for.
Yeah, it's incredible. I think you had like a viral kind of like reporting where your title for your thing was top half of class with a 0.13 GPA. Like just incredible things that somehow are tolerated. It's really remarkable.
Yeah, so the story you're talking about was a school called Augusta Fells. And I had a mother reach out to me who we interviewed, Tiffany France, and her son had spent 4 years in Augusta Fells. It's a high school. He was there for 4 years. And he was still a freshman. And in 4 years, he passed 3 courses. And he had a 0.13 GPA, not a 1.3, a 0.13 GPA. And he was ranked in the top half of his class. Top half of his class. He passed 3 courses in 4 years. And we had his transcript, and it has a class rank. His mom showed it to us. And we did that story. And that story got millions of page views on Fox 45's website, foxbaltimore.com. That's the most viewed story in the history of Fox Baltimore.
Wow, that's amazing. Congrats.
Yeah, thank you. And it's crickets in Baltimore City. Like you don't hear anything. You know, last year, I think it was last March, President Trump announced in a speech at the White House that he was signing an executive order to dismantle the U.S. Department of Education. And in that speech, he mentioned one school system. He mentioned Baltimore, and he mentioned my reporting.
Oh, great.
And he mentioned that 40% of the high schools in Baltimore City in 2023 did not have a single student test proficient in math. Nearly half of all the high schools in Baltimore City had 0 students test proficient in math. So when we did that story in 2023, it blew up nationally. And again, crickets in Baltimore City. President Trump talks about it when he signs the executive order to dismantle the Department of Education. And, you know, the country is like, you know, I mean, it blows up. You know, the president's talking about this. And, you know, what the officials in Baltimore City do is they attack Donald Trump. They didn't say it was wrong. The data's not wrong. That's a factual statistic. But they just attack him because they don't want to demand that their own school system improve or criticize their own school system. And the things that we've talked about here, you know, 6 schools, no kids proficient in anything in 2017. We have a kid with a 0.13 GPA who's in the top half of his class, passed 3 classes in 4 years. We have 40% of the high schools in Baltimore City without a single student who could test proficient in math. And the head of the school system is making $500,000 a year. And the people in Baltimore City appear to be happy with that, at least the elected officials, and this person can keep their job. This is exactly why I wrote Failure Factory, because if that type of scenario continues to play out around the country, we are all in a significant amount of trouble.
I think it is. I think if you find this, I live in LA, and I think there's a lot of sketchy things going on at LAUSD, a much bigger, I think 400,000 kids. But
Yeah.
you talked about attacking Trump. What about you? Have you experienced any blowback or people upset about you shining a light on all this stuff?
In the beginning of Project Baltimore, I certainly did. So I came to Baltimore, as we mentioned, January of 2017, and I started doing reporting on the city. And it was hard-hitting journalism. It's chasing people with cameras because they're doing something wrong and they refuse to be held accountable or answer a question. Like, it's hard-hitting journalism. And I got attacked in the beginning. I got called a racist. I actually have all the emails and stuff in Failure Factory. You can read them. I put them in there. A couple times we had to call the police on people because their threats went a little bit too far. That happened 3 times. But over the past couple years, that's gone away. And I don't think that I've had a threat against me in maybe 5 years, maybe about 5 years, I'd say. I haven't had people calling me racist in a very long time. And I think it's simply because we've been doing this for 9 years. We've never had to retract a story. Everything that we've reported is true. It's honest. It's hard hitting, yes, but it's fair. And we gain the respect of the community. And so much, in fact, that you mentioned that in 2023, I received the Vanguard Award from the Maryland State chapter of the NAACP. So I don't know if everybody's watching this, but if you're just listening to this, I'm a white guy, and the state chapter of Maryland's NAACP gave me an award for the reporting this in Failure Factory, because Baltimore City Schools is a school system that's 93% minority. And I'm reporting on it every day and pointing out how these students are simply not receiving the education that they need. Now, to just add a little context to that, the national headquarters of the NAACP is in Baltimore. And I'm reporting on this stuff, and the state chapter is giving me an award for what we're exposing and how we're showing Maryland that what they're doing is not working when it comes to the academic outcomes of these students who are 93% minority in Baltimore City. And you start putting all this together, and in the beginning we had to fight through a few things, and it was tough, and we had to be careful. I mean careful just in terms of safety and stuff like that, but not so much anymore. And I really think that it's because, as a local journalist, that people see in the community, like I live here, I see people all the time and they come up to me, and it garners that respect. And I'm thankful for that, and I appreciate that, and the willingness of the community to accept me. When I came in here, not from this town, doing really hard-hitting reporting on the education system here and how the money is being spent. And it's been a great honor for me, to be able to do this in Baltimore, because I do feel that we are making a positive impact. I think we are making a difference. And for the people to have accepted me in the community the way that they have is great. Now, with that said, I don't know, the mayor doesn't like me. the people on city council don't like me. At least I get that feeling. The administrators in Baltimore City Schools, they're not calling me up asking if I want to go have a drink with them. So the people that I'm reporting on, the people that have the most to lose, I don't think they really appreciate what I'm doing. But I do believe that a majority of the community does.
Do they still have that young African-American mayor? Is he still mayor now, or do they have somebody
Brandon
else?
Scott?
Yeah.
If that's what you're talking about. Yeah, Brandon Scott's the mayor of Baltimore City.
Yeah, he's a younger guy. But a lot of the people who shared their stories with you are African-American, so it's not like you had this.
I mean, probably all of them. I mean, because it's not just 93% student body. It's probably that high, close to being that high in employment, the people that work there. It may not be 93%, but it's up there. I mean, the CEO of the school system is Black. A lot of the people in her cabinet are black. The head of the police, black. Most of the police officers are black. I mean, it's a very black run city, and it's just
I
a
think it's
fact.
70 or 75% African
Yeah,
American.
yeah.
The
And it's
city
just
of
it's just
Baltimore itself, yeah,
sure,
I
it's a fact.
understand.
It's the way to the most of the members of city council, the mayor, the comptroller of the city, the or the estate's attorney of the city, the auditor of the city. They're all blacks. It's a largely black run city.
I've got a few questions from the chat. Bart asks, how would Chris ameliorate all this if the local politics allowed it? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Can you repeat that question?
Bart is saying, what do you think the solution is? Or I'll just restate it. How would
How would
Chris
Chris ameliorate all this? Okay.
solve it if the local politics allowed it?
So I get that question a lot. What's the solution? And I always break it down between two things. You have policy and you have politics. So the policy side is what's happening inside of a school. And when you read Failure Factory, I go to schools that are seeing great success. Schools in Baltimore City that get the same per pupil allocation of funding, schools that are pulling kids from the same neighborhoods, but they're having noticeably better results. And when you go into these schools, and I take you to them in Failure Factory, you see what they're doing differently. And there's a formula. Like, we know this is 2026. We know how to educate kids. But it seems in public education over the past 20 or 30 years, we've sort of taken what works and replaced it with what sounds good. Like, it sounds good to say, we're not going to arrest kids anymore. We're going to nurture them, which is what Baltimore City has done. But we know what works is holding kids accountable for their actions. And when you go to these schools that are succeeding, you can see what they're doing. They're building relationships with the kids, but the relationships are one of respect and high expectations. You go to these schools that are succeeding, the kids are held accountable. The disruptive kids are removed from the classroom and not put back in. And generally, the people that work at these schools do not make excuses for why the kids are not succeeding. They expect the kids to succeed and to overcome whatever adversity is in their lives. And it's not to say that the adversity isn't real. It's certainly real. But if the adversity is always the excuse for why the students are not succeeding, that's how you have perpetual poverty and generational poverty. And we can see that in places like Baltimore. So that's the policy side. On the political side, there has to be people that get elected to office that are going to hold the school system accountable. And people have to vote for somebody who is going to say, I am not going to raise your taxes, which happens a lot in Maryland, and then give that money to a school and then not hold the school accountable for how it's spending that money and educating the kids. You have to have politicians who are willing to do that. Baltimore City does not have politicians that are willing to do that, and that's why it continues to be the way it is.
Keeps perpetuating and stuff like that. So I think you would agree that it's not the students or the parents, it's the systems and the bureaucracy and the kind of ineffectiveness of the uniparty government. Would you agree with that?
I get the question about parents a lot, and parents obviously have the biggest impact on a child's future. I mean, I'm not going to argue that. Of course, that's true. I have kids. I have the biggest impact on them. The problem here is that in a city like Baltimore, many of the parents were undereducated by the same school system their children now attend. And the parents don't have the education necessarily that they need to be able to help their kids. And in the book, I tell the story of a woman named Michelle Bradley. And she made it to high school in Baltimore City, and she never learned how to read. They just kept promoting her and promoting her and promoting her, matriculating her through the grades until she got to high school, and she never could read. Ends up dropping out, having 2 daughters, and her daughters now attend school. But if you're the mom and you never learned how to read, how can you help your kids? Now, if you're that mom, the best thing that you can do is get your kids to school But once they walk into that schoolhouse, the school has to educate them. Now, Michelle ended up being dyslexic, and the school system never caught it or never cared to catch it. And that was her issue. And it never got diagnosed until she was in her late 30s, nearly 40 years old. But if a school system is getting 1.7 billion tax dollars a year, it is incumbent upon the school system to educate every single child that comes in there. The mom, Michelle, is not getting $1.7 billion a year. The school system is. And the social contract that we have created is that you and I go to work, we pay taxes, that money goes to a school system. And we are told the school system's only objective is to educate the kids. But as we've been talking about, and as Failure Factory points out, they keep the 1.7 billion, but most of the kids don't get a proper education.
Right. Chris, you really know your stuff. I'm really amazing book and a great presentation. Really appreciate it. Is there anything you'd like to add or anything I missed before we wrap it up?
No, I just appreciate you having me on the show. I wrote this book because I want people to read it and I want people to know what is really happening. And everything that we talked about in your show here, this is probably 50 pages of a 250-page book. There is a lot that is going on. And I want people to know it because I make the case that Baltimore City is at the end stages of what happens to a society when there's a failing public education system. Baltimore is a struggling city. It's a losing population. It's one of the most dangerous cities every year, not just in America, but in the Western Hemisphere. And it has really high poverty levels. And it's because the public education system for so long has not been properly educating the people of the city. And we cannot allow this to happen in America. We cannot allow this to happen. And if the people of Baltimore City, the elected officials of Baltimore City are not going to hold the school accountable, I'm going to write this book and I'm hoping that anybody listening to us reads it, because don't let it happen in your community. Don't let this happen where you live, because it will, it can. Because if you have people making a lot of money and you don't demand student outcomes, why would the student outcomes ever improve? What would force it to improve if not the public officials and the community telling the school, if you're going to take my money, this is what I expect in return? So Failure Factory, I hope you pick it up. If you do, I'm the easiest person in the world to get in touch with. It's just Chris Pabst on X, Chris Pabst on Facebook, chrispabst.com. Write me, let me know what you think of the book. Write reviews. I'd appreciate it.
I have your link tree too, so people can check that out. Your website is your full name. And it's a really great book because it's so immediate. It's like your first person right there. Like you said, it's not some journalist from New York City or an academic or something. You're literally talking to people who've like lived it. So it's very human in that sense. Like some of these books are very detached, or they're written by some guy who just sits in an office all day and doesn't talk to people. But it sounds like you're getting a lot of emails and a lot of back and forth from a lot of people in Baltimore. So congrats for that. Like I said earlier in the show, there's a Kindle, audiobook, hardcover, paperback you can check out. And you also just, another thing I'll put on is you just set up a YouTube channel. You like to fish too, right? So people can check that out. It's Hidden Limits Outdoors, right? So I'll try to find a link
outdoors. Yeah, I'm from Maryland, so I do a lot of crabbing, oystering, clamming, mussling, and fishing. Do a lot of shark fishing. Actually, any type of fishing. I'm going to North Dakota in a couple of weeks. I'm going to do some ice fishing there for walleye and perch. Yeah, I'm probably catch a couple pike too. So yeah, Hidden Limits Outdoors. I just started a couple of months ago, and I figured, you know what? I love the fish. I love TV. Why not try to merge them together?
Well, it's interesting. We were talking in the pre-show. I've spent time in Baltimore myself at Fells Point, and one of the things I miss is all the kind of seafood there and the crabs, the blue crab kind of season, right? Those are so good. They don't have that here in California. That's one of the things I miss.
Yeah, you can order.
So I'll have to check it out on your YouTube channel. I didn't know that. I heard fishing, but I didn't know crabbing or oystering, which sounds good. But anything else before I wrap it up?
I just really appreciate. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Chris. Again, for people who didn't hear at the intro, the author's name is Chris Pabst, P-A-P-S-T, and the full title of the book we talked about today. Go get it, because I think this is happening all around the country, not just Baltimore. Full title is Failure Factory: How Baltimore City Public Schools deprive taxpayers and students of a future. And again, it's Chris Pabst. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.